Okay, members, we'll make a start to proceedings. We have one substantive item on the agenda, our oral evidence session with the Minister. So we're going to proceed straight to agenda item. Well, I'll give apologies. Sorry, first members. Barry McElduff, Catherine Seeley, David Hilditch have all given apologies. Any other apologies? No. No problem. I'll return to chairperson's business minutes matters arising, but as we have the Minister here, I think we'll proceed to agenda item 5. Minister, you're very welcome this morning. I refer members to briefing papers starting at page 11 and table correspondence excuse me, on the childcare strategy from the Women's Resource and Development Agency and tabled embargoed correspondence from the Department. Minister, I'll let you know that we had also invited the Education Authority to be here today, given that the wide range of issues that we want to address, many of those, in fairness to you, have no small degree of relevance to the Education Authority as well. They have kindly stated in a 2-sentence letter that they understand that the Minister will be able to answer all the questions that we have. I'm very glad the Education Authority have built up such faith in me. There you are. Lightheartedness aside, however, members, I do think it is extremely regrettable that the Education Authority didn't accept our invitation to be here today. There are a number of extremely serious issues that do pertain to the Education Authority, and if members are content, I will make that regret known to the Education Authority in the strongest possible terms. Okay, moving on. Minister, can I check your timings today?
Yeah, probably need to be gone about 11:15. I can't really go beyond 11:15.
Okay, no problem. We'll proceed promptly then.
12, 12.
No problem. Minister, thanks very much indeed.
I know sometimes we're accused of living in the past, but that might be sort of slightly...
No problem. Also welcome Gary Fair, the Director of Finance for the Department of Education, and Julie Thompson, Deputy Secretary of the Department of Education. Members, the committee appreciates the Minister taking time to be here today. I don't intend to make extensive commentary on political matters, but I hope that the members will use this session to ask questions to gain clarity on a number of issues affecting schools and stakeholders at this moment in time. Minister, do you want to make any short opening comments?
Not to any great extent, just thank the committee inviting me here today. I suppose from that point of view, I'll be happy to take whatever questions there are. We're probably living in a certain level of uncertainty, so therefore I want to try to be as accurate as possible, as open and transparent as possible. I'm conscious of the fact that from that basis as well, I'll try and answer anything, and obviously with my officials here, there may be, particularly as we delve into issues of finance, there may be certain technical aspects. I suppose I want to provide as much assurance to people as possible. I don't want to be, by the same token, giving any sort of false or misleading information in relation to that. And also, I'm conscious of the fact that, particularly whenever we're in a, and this applies whether it's education or indeed other bits, whenever you're in a period of uncertainty, there is always a risk of 50 rumours floating about, and sometimes either through genuine concerns or at times, and I'm not accusing anybody within this room in relation to this, sometimes there can be a little bit of scaremongering can happen with people as well. And I think it's important that given probably the sensitivities of issues as regards some of the issues that are here, and also particularly for our schools, there isn't sort of a false prospectus that anybody at any stage creates in that regard. But beyond that, therefore, I'm happy to answer this.
Well, okay then. Can we start at school budgets then, Minister? Over Christmas there were media reports in relation to on-the-record exchanges here at the Assembly in terms of school budgets, and reports that the Education Authority had rejected all school budget spending plans for the next year, and indeed that the school budgets faces a deficit of 33 million by March of this year. Is that accurate, and can I ask you what is being done in order to address that deficit?
Well, in terms of the school budget situation, it's quite complex. I suppose, in terms of accuracy, and this is where I'm going to be trying to be precise on this, and people may not see this as an enormous distinction, but I think there is a significance. First of all, I don't think it's accurate to say the Education Authority has rejected the budgets. They haven't approved the budgets, which is two separate things. In part, I think they haven't approved because even if we weren't in a position as regards the current situation as regards elections and the impact in terms of the budgets that will have on it, we've been in a certain level of movable feast, and indeed, I suppose, given that there was a position to inject some money here into the school budgets, but also in terms of the wider position for 17-18 was going to be dependent upon what the overall budgetary situation was. Then, I suppose there wouldn't have been a great deal of point in signing off on a level of budgets at that stage when the position would then move within probably about a month or so had we simply got an overall budget. In terms of the overall position as regards deficits, again, there's a slight note of caution here, although I think the general direction of travel is correct. The position in terms of school budgets on the issues of deficits and surplus, a number of schools are obviously in surplus and other in deficit. Given the broader financial situation of education and the broader financial situation of schools, the position on that is that there are some schools in deficits and, generally speaking, moving into bigger deficits. For the most part, you have schools that are in surplus and are probably in decreasing levels of surpluses. Where there has been in the past, the projected figures are always effectively a prediction of where schools will find themselves in terms of a budgetary situation. In the past, there's been a problem that what has been predicted has quite often been very wide of the mark in terms of sometimes you would expect a particular drop in terms of where things are in terms of deficits, sometimes you would expect increases. And the actual behaviour has not necessarily matched the, and I appreciate I'm going into some level of detail, but I think it's important people understand that the actual level of behaviour of schools hasn't always necessarily matched what the predicted behaviour. The reason being that effectively, if you've got a little over 1,000 schools within the system, maybe faced with not dissimilar circumstances, will react differently in exactly the same circumstances. So one school may take a view of, well, actually, things are not that bad this year, but we'll make reasonable cuts this year because we believe there's going to be a rainy day over the horizon and be predicting that bit. Others will say, well, actually, we're in financial difficulties, we'll just keep on spending, or we'll do that. And so therefore, people's reactions on that bit, and effectively it's an aggregation of the situation. The broader situation within education and on the schools side of it, I should say as well, the goalpost will have shifted a little bit because the figures of predictions of 33 million, for instance, in terms of those deficits, that would have been a position effectively at the start of the year in terms of effectively budgets that they went into 16-17 of a prediction. That wouldn't take into account, for instance, of the 14 million that was then reallocated directly into schools. It will also, and I appreciate there's a subject of controversy, and if you take a look at the issue of teacher pay, for instance, while there has been a lot of focus on the 15-16 position, the impact of there not being a 1% uplift means that the baselines in terms of the costs to schools have reduced as well, so that would also impact on the deficit situation. But to give people an idea of the overall global picture, if you compare the situation in 15-16 and project 3 years ahead, for schools to remain without making any changes, if you assume wage rises, you assume particularly what is really hitting schools hard is the national insurance changes in that regard, over a 3-year period you would need roughly about £240 million extra to stand still without there being any degree of changes now. Where you inject money in year, that will start to alter it. If there's any alterations, as happened with the issue of pay, will impact on that. I have indicated that what I wanted to see, and I think this will be very important for the marginal cost in relation, is I would like to see within the budget a reasonable amount of injection of additional money into education, and I think that would principally be directed at the schools' situation. And there are other factors which are actually moving ahead as part of that, which would then impact on that, so that if you had the investing in teacher workforce and if that rolls forward, that will have an impact in terms of those budgets as well. There's no doubt that there's a very difficult situation, and I think it is needed a considerable amount of additional money coming in directly within the school budget. So I appreciate that's reasonably lengthy answer. It's some of the stuff is not a million miles off the mark, put it that way on it, but it's not as clear cut just as that.
Okay, so as of almost February 2017, it is accurate that no school in Northern Ireland has had their budget for FY 17-18 approved, and that there is a projected deficit of at least £33 million as of March 2017.
I'm not sure the 33 million is accurate, because I don't think that was a previous figure, was it?
Yeah,
Gary can sort of...
it's likely to be less than that. But,
What's it likely to be?
Well, the Education Authority is looking at all of that at the moment, so I can't quote a figure at this stage, but it's likely to be less. I think that's, as I mentioned last week, that's one of the issues as well with the forecast surplus position. It hasn't, what has come through as a forecast hasn't always materialised at the end of the day, so it's an area really that's complex, and the Education Authority is looking at detail.
You are kind of depending not just in the wider context, but schools effectively meeting that and taking effectively the same decisions. And actually what you will do at times is schools will take, we'll see the same circumstance and take effectively contradictory decisions or move in different directions.
What is the impact on schools trying to plan their budget for the start of financial year 17-18 that they have not had their plans approved, and when will they have their plans approved?
Well, the intention, obviously, we're in a different situation with the budget, but I think the intention would be then to write to schools in February in terms of the broader
for financial next year.
Yeah,
yes.
For the 17-18 period on that basis on it. Mm-hmm. Again, the problem has been the budget, had it been there, would have adjusted those, well, potentially would have adjusted those by a considerable amount. So again, that would have shifted that. We're now, I suppose, in a position that there clearly isn't going to be a budget set by this executive, and I suppose I would share others' frustration, shall we say.
Does that move us to the 75% of budget that can be allocated, and does that increase that deficit and those pressures further?
No,
then?
Because the position in terms of this, and this is again, right, the position is still, I suppose, it is set, the position will be that there is an intention, I think, to ensure that all departments behave and are treated the same way. The 75% will effectively be that you can spend up to 75% of cash for a period of time. That will then be rolled forward at a later stage to 95%. Having said that, that would be, if you like, if those conditions simply permeated throughout. If we move to a situation where either, which is probably the less likely of the options, that at some stage relatively shortly after an election a new executive is formed, or we move into a period, some form of suspension, and therefore ministers, probably have direct rule ministers, I think from that point of view, it is basically the money that is there for 17-18 overall will be within the overall global situation will be at least what's there in 16-17. 100% will ultimately get spent. It's just I think there will be a different mechanism for that. I think the wider context as well will be the 17-18 budget across what is available to Northern Ireland is likely to be a little bit up on 16-17. It probably will not be of a nature to meet inflationary pressures, but there's likely to be, and there will then be an issue around what happens in terms of if there is any level of additional money, how much of that has got to education. Now, I think those are decisions which will be taken by a minister on the basis that if we have a short-term period in which effectively through DOF permanent secretaries, that what they will do will be to entirely take what is there from a cash point of view and roll it forward. So specifically for schools, there is no reason to suggest that ultimately their figures will go down on that basis. I've also, again, while I cannot set 17-18 budget, I certainly have left advice either to the department and in terms of a memo to the permanent secretary that of some of the money that was able to be found in year to go to schools, that should continue to go in year. Indeed, that therefore the baseline of schools would go up on that basis. But again, because I will not be in office and I have no control over the 17-18 budget, it is to set, if you like, advice clearly on the record for the future, rather than something that I personally can implement.
Why are the deficits so big, Minister?
Well, the reason why the deficits are so big is if you take that essentially would be making an assumption that there's no change in terms of it. But if you take a look in terms of the current budgetary situation, you have a scenario that in terms of what was inherited in 16-17, there was a reduction in the overall education budget. I would be fair to my predecessor and indicate that he tried to protect a certain amount of the school budget, but the overall actual school budget, the start position in 16-17, was down -8 million on last year. You then have a range of pay pressures that will increase that in real terms. The thing which I think there's been relatively little talk about across the board, and it's something which has hit the public sector but has particular impact in terms of schools, is compared with the 15-16 position, because of a national decision was taken in terms of the level of employer national insurance. The estimate directly on schools is to add an extra £22 million of cost to the schools' budget reposition, and that is something that will simply carry on annually being that degree of cost. So over that 3-year period, for instance, that's an additional cost of £66 million. If you estimate that on top of that, there is additional pay pressures in total of, say, 25 million in relation to that, if you're essentially having a situation in which you're injecting in roughly an extra £50 million of pressures into the system without there being any additional money coming in because of the start budgetary position, unless schools then make degrees of changes in terms of redundancies and savings. And I think that's where I suspect there'll be a certain amount of movement in terms of the end-year position in that regard. It's almost a simple balancing exercise, but obviously there's very major implications that if you have the same amount of money, but your costs have gone up considerably, then your deficit position is going to worsen, and indeed for those in surplus, it will decrease as well.
I want to bring in members. Sandra,
thanks. Chris has covered most of the questions, but just really, has there been any change then on schools needing to give the department a 3-year plan ahead? Because that seems to be something that we hear time and again. They get a budget for 1 year, but yet they're required to provide a 3-year plan. And
Yeah.
Actually, strictly speaking, the plan would be to the EA rather than to the department.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that is still a requirement, and it's really good financial management for schools to be planning ahead for a period of time. It's also wrapped up with the deficit position as well. If a school is forecasting a deficit, it should also be forecasting how it will get out of that deficit in due course. And maybe just to go back to another point that was made earlier in terms of the deficit position, and whether the fact that the Education Authority hasn't approved plans for this year, I think part of that is wrapped up in the fact that in the past, as I understand it, the Education Authority would have approved plans that were forecasting deficits. So I think whilst I can't speak for the Education Authority in terms of schools that were forecasting a balanced budget, those that were forecasting a deficit, it's probably a positive sign that the Education Authority is seeing this as more of an issue, and over the course of this financial year has been looking at it on a more detailed basis at a school by school basis. But yes, 3-year financial plans are still required.
Okay, and Minister, you made reference to leaving direction for whenever you're not.
No, sorry, advice rather than direction. I mean, direction would be something that would be compellable in that regard. I felt it was important, particularly, I mean, I think from the point of view of Permanent Secretary, we've spoken in terms of what we would like to see from a budgetary position, and that is effectively down on the record. But particularly the position, and whether it's for a Permanent Secretary or more likely then at a point where there is someone else taking that decision, and particularly if it's a direct rule minister, certainly under those circumstances, I'm very happy to offer whatever advice I can, but I felt it was important that while technically speaking you'll be in a position that effectively the budgets will roll, the current position will roll forward on that basis. Mm-hmm. Very specifically, there was in-year changes that we tried to find within the confines of what was the pre-existing budget, what could be found to be diverted directly into schools. Now, there was 14 million given, 6.6 million was effectively a quasi-accrual. I think there's a little bit of an issue just over the technical which arose from some money had been set aside in terms of the pay issue. But 7.4 million was effectively through other changes in the department, in many cases savings within the department or other bodies, and that money was, if you like, squeezed to go directly in schools. Because I think everyone will agree that was where the principal issue was. We had previously looked, before we reached the point in terms of the initial examinations on budget, if we were looking to do as much as we could for the school budget, how much of that 7.4 million could then be directly baselined in budgets, irrespective of what was got additionally. It was found that just under 6 million of that could go directly in, because of the 7.4 million, the bulk of things were savings, which then could be directly, on a semi-permanent basis, if you like, could be directed into schools. There was some of that money, of that 7.4 million, with things that effectively we weren't doing in 16-17 that we would have had to do and effectively put in place in 17-18. But the bulk of it was stuff. From that point of view, I felt it was important that that is something that whoever is taking then the decision at that point in 17-18 is aware of that and sees at least an intention there of that, and realises, if you like, the importance of the broader situation directly as regards the school budget. You know, that memo would also give indications of what I think is needed as a minimum within the system as a whole to be brought in as, if you like, new money in that regard, and that whatever opportunities there are, either within whatever additional cash there is to the executive as a whole, or indeed through monitoring rounds, what needs to be sought to be able to provide a degree of boost, particularly overwhelmingly to the schools budget.
Okay. So we're asking schools to make 3-year plans, so we can't even tell them what the budget is for next year?
Well, the reality is, well, first of all, at the moment, nobody knows what the budget is. It is important probably that people do at least project ahead, but that, to some extent, has pretty much always been the case because,
It's always been the case, but it's in your prerogative to change it. That's really
with respect in terms of the change. Well, no, I think it is right that what I'm saying is, irrespective of the landscape, I think for schools to look ahead and where they are is important. I think that is good financial planning on that basis. The problem, I suppose, is that in terms of changes to that, will be subject to what the budget is for that particular year. Now, we're in a particular situation as regards 17-18, that because the plug has got pulled and effectively no budget therefore has been provided at all, with the best will in the world, I can't give any certainty. It's beyond my control to give any certainty to schools. You know, they can project ahead as well for 3 years. I would certainly have been striving, and I hope whoever is there in my place will strive to overall increase the level of budget for education as a whole and for the school system. And I think for education to be able to cope with the levels of pressures that are there are a range of things that can happen and probably need to happen, which will make education in a broader level that there will be better levels of efficiency, better levels of product. But I think efficiencies in and of themselves will not be enough to avoid the sort of pain that would be there if there is no new money at all. And I think there is a need for an injection of new money within that. And I think, again, I suspect there's probably a level of consensus around that. But obviously, even if we were in a situation where government was simply continuing, I suppose, unfortunately, it's not just a situation of, I ask for new money and I get it. But I think it's important, at least, that there is, I think, a broad consensus among all of us involved in education that there is a need for the education budget, at least, to be moving up, albeit in difficult financial circumstances.
Okay. I think we still have Rosemary, Carla and Colin on this issue alone, so I want to try and keep us moving on. Folks have a wide range to get through, so bring in Rosemary.
Sorry, I was moving on to other
okay.
issues.
Can I check?
Sorry.
Carla or Colin, do you want to come in on school budgets?
Very, very
Is that okay,
quickly.
Rosemary? Yeah?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Very quickly, thank you, Minister, and thank you for your comprehensive overview. Just, I suppose, I want to just put on record and highlight again those schools who are struggling with their budgets because of maybe not being able to avail of the free school meals enhancement and the different. I'm thinking of schools that I have visited within my own constituency that are maybe deemed to be in affluent areas, but yet have children with very, very specific needs. And I'm just wondering, is there any ongoing work?
Internally, what has happened, I suppose a lot of the money will come through the common funding formula.
Yeah.
Internally, we've kicked off for officials to start looking at that. That is a pretty comprehensive job. It is probably something that, and probably will continue on, but you're talking about probably 18 months before you reach a result of that. I suppose the issue a little bit with that is you want to have something, and people will have different views over what the end goal or the end result in that would be. You want to have something which is as fair a distribution as possible in that regard. I'm not going to say what fairness would be in that regard. Although I think inevitably what has tended to happen in the past, whenever any formula has been looked at, unsurprisingly, those who have gained from it have probably quietly celebrated those schools that have lost out through any change have processed it loudly, and I think that's the nature of the beast. So the problem is, you make any change to the system, there'll be winners and losers in that regard. But I think we need, in a comprehensive way, to ensure that whatever there is as fair as possible. That's why, to be honest, it's not something which you could just look at the figures and say, right, we're making a 5% change and a 10% change there. Do that in an afternoon. It is a very serious piece of work, but that is something which is started ongoing.
It is just, again, to highlight that those schools, I believe, that are really struggling out there in terms of their budget,
I think
are the schools that, you know,
you will get, I suppose, sometimes in other contexts, or sometimes talk about the squeezed middle, or just about managing or whatever, and there will be schools that, shall we say, they're looking, they are not maybe an area of massive high levels of social deprivation, targeting social need, but will have needs. But by the same token, it's not as if the children getting dropped off those schools, that mummy and daddy are leaving them in their BMWs to the schools either. You know, and there's a bit where there's going to be a certain amount, whatever way you do the thing, that are going to fall into that level of category. And sometimes those are the schools which maybe lose the most in that regard. I think there's an issue of fairness. I think the issue to some extent is that the overall quantum needs to be higher to go into schools, but there will always be, in whatever way it's resolved, some level of argument about whether that money is distributed fairly or not in that regard.
thank you.
Okay, Colin.
Thank you, Minister, for coming along this morning. I suppose maybe the old saying about making hay when the sun shines, some schools will have a surplus because they've been preparing to do some work, because they've been saving almost over a rolling basis to do bits and pieces. Is there any assurance those schools that have surpluses that they will be, you know, that's protected for them to use within their school? Because prudence and good management from some principals, they're fearful that maybe there'll be a rob of... No,
I mean, look, I've never supported any degree of sort of robbing in that basis. And I think one of the other issues as well is, like, there's no doubt there's genuine pressures out there. There's genuine push on that side of things. There will be different levels of responses to that from schools. There will be a small number of schools at one end of the scale that arguably are overspending to the extent that they should be behaving more prudently. And some schools who will take a view, well, if I go into bigger and bigger deficits, sure, what are they going to do? And to some extent, that's why I think the point that Gary made earlier about the EA, who are supposed to effectively be the police officer for that side of things, are sort of why maybe the fact they've not just signed off automatically on some of those schools that are going into bigger and bigger debt. Now, in many cases, the bigger and bigger deficit are because there's a model which, with the best will in the world, you could have the best economic model in the world and it wouldn't solve those schools, but there are also some schools that are acting irresponsibly. There are other schools, as you say, that in terms of their situation have been very prudent on that bit. And, you know, I'm conscious of the fact that there is a need, obviously, to spend money within schools directly on children. But I've also seen from many years ago in the past a situation where there was effectively a target figure, and has been a target figure of you should be realistically within about 5% of surplus. And there is a danger, and I've seen this in other government departments as well on it, that it's a question of, well, we're coming near the end of the financial year, we have a bit too much money, and money needs to be spent sensibly in that regard as well. So there's no desire, I think, to punish schools on that basis. On it.
Okay, folks, try and get our questions and ministerial responses as short as possible. Okay. No time is tight. Can I, before we move on, Minister, did you answer the question as to when you expect us to progress from no school spending plans being approved to spending plans being approved?
I think the idea directly, I mean, I suppose in terms of the approval is with the EA, but we're looking to get more information directly, but we have letters to schools in February.
Are you talking about this year or next year? Are you talking
this
about
year, as it stands?
In terms of this year, I think effectively schools have been spending to the budget. Whilst they're not formally approved, they have been spending to those budgets. We're late in the year now in terms of the formality of approving those. Okay.
In terms of the Education Authority, it's our understanding that the Education Authority has indicated it needs to make £50 million of savings in 2017 to 18. Is that accurate?
No, not necessarily accurate. What I think is the case is that the Education Authority is doing what might be described as a certain level of scenario planning. One of the things which I have to say concerned me when I came into office was Education Authority had a budget. Now, to be fair, it was a budget which had got a reasonable level of cut within that. They had a budget in 16-17. There was a considerable period of time to get them to finalise effectively what was effective budget to live within 16-17 until a reasonable bit into this year. I didn't think that was particularly good financial planning, and so therefore what we've said to the EA is you need to actually think through what a range of scenarios are to be ahead of the game, so that, for example, even within 16-17, there may well have been things which, on the grand scheme of things, I mean, there's no cuts which are particularly welcome, but there are things which were less painful and reasonably sensible, but because they had not been thought through initially and were only coming in discussion during the summer, maybe were implemented from October and you get, you know, a few months of savings rather than a full year's savings. The idea, I suppose, was to say, look, we don't know precisely what the financial landscape is. You need to actually think of what level of savings and, you know, I suppose effectively work out if you had, say, £50 million worth of savings to make, how would you start doing that? And it's identifying, if you like, whatever options are there. You know, I would guess, I think that in terms of the levels of pressures, the other thing as well is that in terms of savings, I suppose that wouldn't be a net figure, because you will find part of that, I suppose, will be used to effectively finance. There will be certain areas where there will be additional pressures moving forward, be it through pay, be it through special needs and that regard. So they're doing a bit of scenario planning, I suppose.
Okay, well, we've seen access to some scenario planning, I think, via minutes, which is scenario planning 5 to 10p increase in school meals, 10% increase in music service charges, at 10% cost reduction in music service, standardisation of home-to-school transport, new home-to-school transport charges, and changes to the common funding scheme. Are those scenarios that have been presented to you, and do you have any reaction to them?
We haven't got any proposals directly back off, because at this stage, the idea, I suppose, and to be fair, I think if we're saying to people, right, you need to think through what options there are from a budgetary point of view, I think that should be relatively open-ended. I think it shouldn't probably start with a predetermined outcome to say, take everything off the table, or here are the only things that... Now, there are things there which would probably, if it came forward as proposals, not be acceptable. And there are things also which are not, even if they were suggested as a proposal by the Education Authority, are not necessarily for the Education Authority directly to deliver. And so, for example, mentions made of the issue, and I'm not going to prejudge something, so I'll maybe talk about the process rather than any end result on it.
We need to be as concise as possible.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
If you take the issue of charging for transport,
yep.
At the moment there's legislation which basically says that it is free. If you were to make a change to that, it would require regulations, which would mean that it's not simply for the EA to say, okay, here's our plan, we're doing this. It would not only require consultation, but actually therefore require legislation through this House and therefore the approval of the EA. So
okay, that provides
at this stage,
okay, that provides some reassurance then. I think the processes that might be followed.
That's fair enough. Yeah. But you know, they're thinking a wide range of things, and even previously there'd been at times various ideas that have been put forward by the EA in terms of how they deal with the 16-17 budget, some of which were then implemented, others which, even in terms of leaving aside their desirability, were not practical or doable. So at this stage, I think we're trying to say, look, have a bit of forward thinking, have a bit of thinking as to where you're going to be for 17-18. Come up with whatever range of options you've got, at least then you consider. And to be fair, on some of those, it's not even necessarily the EA would actually turn around and say, well, actually, this we're putting forward as proposals. Those have not come forward as proposals. So,
and it has been helpful having a number of options on the table for informal discussion with the Education Authority as early as possible, because, as the Minister says, some consultation or changes to regulations may be required on some of the options.
As I said, that's one reason alone why it's disappointing that the Education Authority declined the invitation to be here today, given the levels of scenario planning that is going on a wide range of issues that affect our families across Northern Ireland. Before I bring other members in, can I ensure that we've addressed it today, given that we're on the topic of the Education Authority, in terms of the protective notices that the Education Authority has required of our youth services, I think primarily in Belfast at this stage. I know you've issued 2 statements, Minister, one yesterday and one today, to provide some reassurance that decisions haven't been taken. The clear response that I'm getting, I'm sure other members are getting from youth workers in our community, is that they don't want assurance that no decisions have taken. They want assurance that a decision has been taken to provide the funding that they need to continue to perform the kind of work that they do.
I'll bring in officials maybe just in relation to this as well. But the position is I cannot set the 17-18 budget all I can say is not only have no decision been taken, there hasn't been even a proposal to do that. Now, I think the letter that was sent out, quite frankly, was probably quite clumsily written, and I think actually went beyond what should be the case. The wording in terms of the position is no different from what has happened on a number of occasions in previous years, particularly where a budget isn't set. So I think, albeit I think because of the way the letter was written, it probably led to people drawing inferences which shouldn't have been drawn. But I think it's very understandable that people drew those inferences. Let me put it this way: not only is there no decision to be taken, there's no been proposal put to cut that. It is an earmarked fund, which, in terms of the situation, as we move ahead with particularly the cash spend allocation, the position I think will be that the permanent secretaries will effectively be allocating cash on the basis which it was spent previous year. If you're looking to make a change to an earmarked position, it will then require the approval of the department. So again, the EA couldn't act unilaterally in that regard. But I suppose the only issue from the point of view of being able to say, I am allocating this cash for 17-18, I don't have the power to do that directly. What I think does need to happen, but it's not something which can happen overnight, and the process already started. One of the other restrictions on this was that the way this has been set up was on the basis of it being an annual amount in that regard. I don't think that is particularly good practice to give people certainty. So there's been start of work between the Education Authority and the Department to see if how actually this can be more mainstreamed as being a sort of a longer term approach that would require policy changes which will not be in a position to be immediately put into place. But that, I think I think the situation that whenever you get a crisis and you have to effectively follow procedure of sending out protective notices, it's not good practice in that regard, and I think therefore there would need to be a degree of change. But I can't give any absolute guarantees with regards to 17-18 budget, other than the fact that you'll be in a situation that the requirements are that if you like cash it's almost like the year keeping on extending on that basis on it.
Okay. Many members want to come in briefly in relation to the youth services budget, and I've got Rosemary and Sandra in on other issues, I think. But Colin, do you want to come in briefly on this?
I suppose maybe just on this, because I think it's the process that's important in this, because I think there's definitely an effort from yourself and the department to explain the process, and that's possibly differing from the information that's been supplied by EA, and it's that difference that's maybe causing the worry on the ground. Also, I think because this was introduced a number of years ago and was literally on the ground called Minister's Fund, that it almost feels that it actually belongs to the Minister, yet it's an amount of money that is an allocation that's given to the Education Authority or the boards that then deliver that. So I think that has created it. But I just want to maybe to confirm that what you're saying is that there is no attempt at all to change the budget line. You're not going to be in charge of the delivery of that budget, but you expect that it will just roll as it has done in previous times. And
I would confirm all those in terms of expectations. An earmarked fund, if it is to change, by its definition, earmarked would require then the department to. And if the education, and there's no intention of doing that. And
if the Education Authority so wished to change that fund, they would need to come back and ask the department for approval for it.
They cannot. It can't be a situation for the sake of argument of, well, actually, sort of, we've got, say, £500 million for next year, or we've got a bit of pressures here. I'll tell you what, we'll cut X, Y, and Z out of the earmarked fund and just do that. Okay. Anything in terms of changes to any earmarked fund would have to be approved by the department in that regard.
Could I push for just one further bit? I might be pushing it a bit far. Could we go as far as saying that those youth workers that are working on the ground under that funding stream, that their jobs are as safe as anybody else's insofar as budgets going forward? Nobody knows at this stage the changes that there might be in 1 month or 2 months, so they're just in the same position as everybody else. They're not. I
think yes, that is the case. They're safer than mine, but that way, Colin. I doubt if anybody would draw a great deal of reassurance from that, to be honest with it. Yes, they are. That's right. They're the same position.
Minister, why then have protective notices been issued?
Because that is the standard practice, where you're in a situation in which there is no budget in that regard. It's a precautionary legal move on that basis. The same thing happened, I know, for instance, in 15-16, where there was certainly at that stage then a large delay to the budget, and there was a question mark whether the budget would be set on the issue of welfare reform at that stage. That has happened, I think, in other occasions, and I think will probably be happening to other workers. This is probably the most high-profile one.
It's an annual practice within the voluntary and community sector generally, and would not necessarily even just within education. But I think, given the current circumstances, it is taken on a degree of attention.
But
and I think, put it this way, I think the thing which didn't help, to be honest, having seen the letter, it kind of went
letter
beyond
from the education.
There was a letter, I think, went from the Education Authority in terms of the protective notice to the staff, which I think, in terms of the wording of that, had a bit of extra spin of a negative nature on that, made a certain level of presumption within that, which in terms of the wording wasn't.
Have you raised that with the Education Authority then?
Well, I think, yeah, we've raised it has been raised, yeah, with them.
Okay.
And Chair, what was the response? Because it said, like, not only are putting diagnosis, like, there's no expectation there's going to be any money, this will probably get cut type of thing on it.
I mean, are the Education Authority offering any clarification by way of public statement? I know they've snubbed our committee today, regrettably, but have they offered any clarification on this, given the level of concern that it's caused?
Yeah, I think that the conversation with the EA around the difficulties, and obviously Minister's statements just clarifying where things are actually at the moment.
So, to be clear, then, the extended hours detached outreach funding would require your approval to be cut, and you have no intention
No,
of
I have no
approving the
intention.
reduction of that
From
fund?
that point of view, I suppose
Okay.
potentially there would be a successor in title, could do that, but it would require approval. It's not something they can do unilaterally.
That's helpful. Okay, I have a number of other EA-related issues, not least special educational needs. Rosemary, Sandra, do you want to come in briefly on other issues, or are you content for me to try and cover Education Authority issues before I bring you in on those? Content? Okay. In terms of special educational needs then, Minister, obviously this committee had done a lot of work to bring openness and transparency to the proposals of the Education Authority in relation to reducing special educational needs nursery provision from full-time to part-time in at least 6 schools this year. The clear grounds on which the Education Authority argued that needed to take place was an increase in demand from approximately 300 enrolments to 360. The Education Authority has provided us with information that actual enrolments are only approximately 300. Are you aware of that? Can you provide any more clarity as to why
I think in terms
they reduced those hours and there has been no significant increase in enrolment?
Well, you said it's increased by 300.
Yeah, well, last year's enrolment was around 300 as well.
Okay, sorry, I thought you said it increased by 300.
No,
look,
it has stayed reasonably the same as far as we're aware, because getting access to this data has been extremely difficult.
I understand that. Look, I think in terms of detail, Julie, don't
We've ongoing liaison with the EA around the special educational needs nursery side, and obviously it's a moving position, which you'll understand as children come along and require placement.
As far as I'm aware, it hasn't moved, and we're in February.
Yeah, and I guess the issues are around geographical issues about where the actual schools are and the provision across the province. So you can't just globally look at the whole of Northern Ireland. We have to have the right provision in the right area. So it's a combination of that as well.
Okay, and in terms of the review that was undertaken and the consultation stage of that review has completed, and the intention was to publish a report for full open consultation in January. That hasn't happened, and it's my understanding that it can't happen during PERDA. Is that correct?
More or less. I mean, I think the issue, I think, is certainly is that the protocol, and I'd face this, it was with one internal issue as well. The protocol is such that they do the consultations either from a department point of view or an arm's length body in this during an election period and during PERDA. I think sort of whenever that was initially ready, it hadn't, I don't even know directly whether it has passed through I don't think it's actually passed through the Education Authority to be green lighted, even just in terms of the actual report. So I think the likelihood would have been that it would probably have kicked off in any event in February. But because of the election, I think it will then be effectively delayed a month. I understand the EA have advised us that obviously that shouldn't create a major problem. However, if there was any danger of that impacting on the September 17 intake in terms of referral requests, they have an internal planning group which is specifically trying to deal with that issue if there needs to be any degree of interim measure. But the guidance, unfortunately, and as it's happened elsewhere, is you don't do consultations during the PERDA period. I would like to see, because I think it's a very important position in that regard, that I would hope that the EA would plan that for as soon after the election as they possibly can. As you know, Chair, in terms of what are the other issues in terms of the integrated education report, but because that's more within directly my remit, I've, shall we say, made sure that the actual start of that will be as soon after the elections as possible, i.e. actually it's launching, I think, 15 minutes before closing polls, which is the earliest I could legally do it.
Okay. How does that affect? Will the special education needs nursery provision review be completed in time for its recommendation to take effect in September 17?
In terms of where it's at the moment, it has to go through its final clearance within the EA, so it has yet to get its own internal clearances within the EA. Then it obviously then needs to come out to consultation post the election period, and we'll need to see where we get to at that stage and how quickly that can actually happen at that point in time, depending on the circumstances. And that consultation then will proceed. No final decisions can be taken on models and all of that until that consultation has actually been worked through. And then the response is evaluated. So the EA will, as Minister already indicated, will be looking at what they need to do for September and looking internally about that, about the needs of the children, about the provision within the special schools and trying to match those through. But there can be no final decisions on final models until the consultation is worked through and response is evaluated, and that will be post the election.
I would suggest that raises serious concern as to whether that will be implementable by September 17. There are, in my conclusion, and before bringing anybody else in on this, there are obviously a significant amount of families and principals who want to see a reversion to full-time provision in September 17, and I'm sure who will make their views known with the concern that may not be the case. Any other members want to come in on this particular issue or related special educational needs issues? Colin?
Yeah, just it was maybe a question I wanted to ask was about is there any way of improving the connections between the health service and the education service in terms of specialist treatment that needs to be delivered to young people within special schools? I understand that at present we have examples where a school had 45 pupils when it opened and had one speech therapist, one OT and one physio. The numbers at that school have doubled, and we're looking at the same level of input from those specialists, and obviously that means that there's just a direct reduction in the number of hours and the number of times that they get these treatment. And these
there is ongoing liaison, I suppose, particularly as regards both the practitioner's point of view and obviously arising out of the Cooperation Act, for instance. And I know whenever the committee into the last assembly put in new sort of review on that. I mean, one of the really frustrating things is, even in terms of special needs, we have regulations that are effectively ready to go, but cannot proceed at the moment, which will obviously put some meat in the bones in terms of special education needs. Yeah, no, I think it's a valid enough point that we need to keep on pushing on that, because I think the nature of the thing, again, sometimes people will have a snapshot of what special needs is, and it is a massively wide spectrum, but it's also a massively widely changing spectrum, and the state of play in terms of special needs now as what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and what it will be in 10 years' time. And that will have particular impacts on what is needed within particular schools, irrespective of the...
A very brief supplementary, Minister. I'll not go into individual details because time doesn't allow us, but there are significant concerns that therapy provisions are not taking place to the statutory standard that they need to. In a number of locations. Would it be possible for you, it's adequately serious that I would ask you today to commit to meet with a small group of parents who are affected by this before the election, if that's possible? I would certainly be happy to using...
The only issue is, from the point of view, my only restriction, and it may be the best one in the world if it's set up with senior officials, because my scope to do something, because once it gets to midnight tonight, my ability to have anything in terms of new initiatives or actions are severely limited in that regard. But I think it's an important issue. Obviously, it needs to be progressed. So certainly if the liaison. I mean,
it's primarily between Belfast Trust, from my point of view, and I could offer MENCAP as an umbrella body to provide administrative and organisation.
We can certainly get a meeting set up for that sort of a Chris.
Chair, would it be possible to ask the officials, just on that basis, if they knew of anybody within the health service that might be of an equal level that could join them in that? Because obviously a lot of the issues that will be raised will filter down the health.
We'll action that. Minister, very briefly as well, you had the committee has met informally with the Buddy Bear Trust as well. Can you provide us any update with regards to your efforts to improve communications between the Education Authority and the Buddy Bear Trust?
There was clearly there was a situation which there was clearly, for whatever reason, there clearly was a degree of breakdown in communication within that. And in particular, I think arising out of an ETI report in 13-14, where information was sent on. It's clear from talking to Brendan that he'd never received that information. That points, I think, a reasonable potential way forward. I think there's an opportunity, because it made a suggestion of a scheme of cooperation between Buddy Bear and a nearby other special school. I suggested, I think, what may well be the case is that if a pilot is developed involving Buddy Bear and a couple of other schools, because a large part of the breakdown in communication and breakdown in problem will be those who are doing the placement within EA, who are particular professionals in that regard, seem to clearly take a view that they have some levels of doubt as to whether Buddy Bear is the right place to do that. I think if we get something which can operate as a pilot scheme to then evaluate conductive education, particularly within the Buddy Bear setting, and then do a degree of comparison with other schools that are, providing different services in that regard, that would be a productive way forward. I think that's something which I think both Buddy Bear and other schools will need to develop, but I think that is very much would be in line with what ETI, and I think that's a sensible route forward.
And you bring in whatever influence you have to bear on the Education Authority to progress that in a timely fashion.
Well, no, the issue on that side of it, Chris, is that the report suggested Buddy Bear working with a special group. Now that, in my mind, I would be fairly flexible whether that would be the individual local school or whether things. Okay. I think it's about putting together a business case and a proposal which would essentially be robust and say this is in line with what ETI is, give some level of support to this to allow this to go forward. So the first step has got to come between Buddy Bear and a couple of other schools in that regard, because at the moment...
Is anyone providing any type of assistance or support to them to do that?
Certainly I know different parties have spoken there in relation to that, and that is, I suppose, the advice that has been given. I suppose the key barrier, particularly for Buddy Bear, is that they would need probably to find it, to make this in line with what ETI, they need to find probably a willing partner, or at least one or more other schools to do that, because I think that's the route. The more it goes down the line of what the ETI suggested, I think the more difficult it is for anybody at whatever stage to resist that.
Okay, I'll bring Rosemary and then Sandra in.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. One thing, as you'll be very aware of, we're at the moment in the middle of strike action in many of the schools. Can you give us an update in relation to...
there are ongoing discussions that are taking... There are discussions that they met, I think, and indeed they met yesterday. I think the next task was to take... Now, I think it's fair comment to say there's... Well, I don't want to breach the confidentiality of the discussion. There's probably a reasonable gap between where management side is and the unions going forward. But what the next task, I think, management side have put in a paper, the trade union side have put in a paper, is looking ahead to where we can go. I think the next, in terms of what should really be on the agenda, I think the next step, I think, is some degree of tasking, which I think possibly happened yesterday, of the two sides to get together to kind of work out at least a common agenda within that, because these are issues where not just what's happened in that, but there are a range of issues which have been ongoing for
a number of years,
many years. Maybe interpreted a different way, but you could say legacy issues a bit as well on that side of things. So there are ongoing discussions. I think there is quite a distance to go to close the gap on those issues, and I think it's important that within those discussions people are realistic. But I don't want to get into the detail directly of what's happening, because that might prejudice whatever happens in relation to that.
Just one question. I'm going to localise it now, Minister. I learned through the press that you were in Pretoria during the week in relation to announcing that there would be a new build there in relation to the new school, Enniskillen Royal Grammar School. Can you give me any idea of when that you would hope to have that completed, or when it could be completed by?
Off the top of my head, I'll just check it. Yeah, I think looking at the business, obviously this is created the preferred site. I think we're anticipating it'll be 18 months before people were on site directly. There's some statutory processes still to be, some of the planning issues which should be, but I mean, given the fact there's a school there already, you'd think that shouldn't be impossible in that regard. So 18 months to get on site and then 18 months build.
Right, okay.
That's a bit of time frame.
And Devonish College, is it still on queue to start in 2017?
I don't think there's any particular change in terms of timescale. I don't have Devonish, don't have the details in front of me, but I'm not aware of any particular issues there.
Right.
I don't know.
If I can just pick up on a general budgetary point, and I'm not commenting on any particular capital scheme, but obviously the progress of capital schemes will be dependent on budgets being agreed as well. Obviously, where there's contractual commitments already made, likelihood is they will continue, but it's just to add that caveat, obviously. In the
And again, within the broader sphere of things, while there's that general level of uncertainty, I mean, there still will be capital money in that regard. And I think part of the thing is I'm keen that there isn't actually any delays in capital money, which is why we try to get some other things sorted out with the NIO, which ultimately haven't been able to be brought over the line in time. I was keen to, obviously, the written statements out there in terms of the SEP, make a new call in that regard. That will be for others to pick up at a later stage. But if simply that was long-fingered, that could have implications for our flow of money. And I think it's with capital, it's not just the amount, but it's also the level of flows that you can have within a year.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Sandra, you wanted to come in on capital spending around the school enhancement programme and the Fresh Start shared and integrated education budgets,
Thanks. Yeah, Minister, this issue's been raised before, but there's the 50 million in this year that really hasn't been spent. I think you were expecting to have only spent 3 million before the end of the financial year. You were seeking to carry that over.
I have both written twice now to, there was an initial approach made to the Secretary of State in relation to this. I think the blockage so far in the range of things has probably been through Treasury. I was then trying to, in a spirit of comradeship, go with the Finance Minister to meet the Secretary of State, the Finance Minister had a few other interesting ideas in terms of Fresh Start money, and to see where we could actually widen the pool in relation to that. Now, we've not had a positive responses yet. I think one of the problems is in terms of the wider context. I suspect even anybody within the NIO Secretary has probably been preoccupied in other things in that regard. I still think it makes sense for changes to be made to widen what that can be spent on. In particular, I think on a couple of grounds, the timing in terms of end-year flexibility is important, but we would require effectively the terms and conditions to be changed by Treasury. I think there's still an argument made there. It has not been successful so far in terms of an argument, but I think in terms of end-year flexibility, in terms of where it can be spent, in terms of hopefully looking at things like super mixed schools to see if there's something to be done there. And also at the moment, for instance, for the integrated sector, Fresh Start doesn't apply to SEPs, and I think there are certain integrated schools that are in a very good position that do not want a new build, but could actually benefit from an SEP. Now, they are not excluded from that, but again, if we can lever in additional money, those are the kind of areas that we've been pressing with government. As that would require Treasury approval, we haven't got that. But that's not to say that is completely dead. I think it's an issue that the department will continue to pursue on that basis, because the maximum we can get out of this for us in Northern Ireland in terms of Fresh Start, I think, is critical. The big problem with capital money is, you can't just, as you could with a lot of the revenue stuff, simply sign off a cheque and it's spent within that year. That was always going to be a degree of the problem, but that's where we've been pressing on it, Sandra.
Okay, thanks, Minister, for that. But we had 50 million in this financial year, and we've only spent 3 million of that. Can you tell me what that 3 million was spent on?
Not off the top of my head, Sandra, in that regard. I mean, I know, for instance, I've been at, there has been a new build, I think probably the one that was first on track, I think was at Drumlin's Integrated, which I was at, which I think certainly is in the process of things to be opened very, very shortly. So I suspect that might have been part of that. I don't have the figures to hand as to where that is, but that's going to be a problem automatically with capital, and particularly capital that is not simply one of the other things in terms of the skill enhancement programme. But if that can be brought in, the advantage of skill enhancement is, as well as anything else, it's also money can be spent quicker, because traditionally sort of a skill enhancement programme tends to be within about 18 months to 2 years. If you're talking about a new capital build, we're still, in terms of processes, talking 3 to 5 years minimum in that regard on it.
So the lack of flexibility in what you spend it on, that was set by whom? Just clarify.
Well, that's basically the deal that was there.
It was part of the
let me put it this way, as all things in terms of Treasury are in terms of terms and conditions, would ideally not spend any money on anything in that regard. So there's a wrestle which has to happen on every aspect of that. They, whatever the commitment was there in the broader level for £50 million a year, have kind of dug their heels in terms of fairly tight conditions on that. So it's a big question about trying to make those conditions more flexible to allow a degree of spend in that regard. But Treasury have set the conditions at this stage in that bit, so it's a question of persuading, whether at political level or whatever, Treasury to relax those conditions.
And you've been trying to do that for how long?
Well, there's been initial contact certainly from, essentially I suppose what kicked this off was we were looking at a SEP announcement probably in late autumn, but that would have meant, and there were some initial discussions before that as to whether then there could be a fresh start element to the SEP announcement. There was some good work happened at officials level, but we needed to get buy-in both from NIO in general, but Treasury. I'd written then to, met with the Secretary of State, raised this with him in late autumn. I think, to be fair, probably the block at that stage was coming from Treasury. We've then renewed this, rather than simply just jump in to an SEP at that point on it, had another go in terms of a lengthy letter, and we're seeking, I think initially there was to be a meeting in December, a joint meeting with myself, the Secretary of State and the Finance Minister. The Finance Minister, I think, then that didn't suit him in terms of a date. We'd look to try and rearrange that. There is an extensive letter which has been written to the Secretary of State highlighting the strong case as to how this would benefit, if you like, the aims of Fresh Start by making those changes in that regard. I'm not aware certainly whether there's actually been a direct reply as such. Certainly nothing has been received in the positive in that regard. I suspect the attention possibly has been elsewhere, but to be fair, I don't think the blockage was within Northern Ireland. I think any degree of reluctance has been from the level of Treasury level.
Okay, so we
Yes.
don't...
Sorry, you want a last question,
Yeah,
Sam?
I was just, you don't expect to have an answer then before an election, before the end of the financial year, and it
For today at 5
could be moving into the mix in the future then, basically.
Yeah, I mean, but I think it's still an issue. I mean, irrespective of things, it's an issue worth pursuing, because I think we want to get the maximum benefit of this
Absolutely. Otherwise that money just stays with Treasury.
No, I
lost to Northern Ireland.
I understand that, and I think everything that's been from our end on it, anything that is humanly can be done to try and make sure that is spent, and that's where some of the more inventive thinking, shall I say, is coming in terms of how that could be spent. But it's not just in our position to sign off on that.
Minister, I know you have to go. Lord Morrow and Carla, we're hoping to ask a brief question
Chair,
before you do.
very,
if
very
that's
briefly,
okay.
I just wanted to hear if the Minister can further update us in relation to the shared schools programme. Is it?
Well, there's another call has gone out. I think we're waiting on evaluation of that.
Yes, the call went out. Schools are being evaluated on an ongoing basis. We have 349 schools working at the moment on shared education, and that call is an open call. So any more partnerships that want to come forward can do so to feed into that.
I've been at a number of schools where that partnership is happening, and there's a lot of good work happening on the ground. And I suppose there's probably sometimes all of us will naturally focus in on the problems, but let's face it, there are a lot of good things happening within schools, between communities, which I think, there are positives to be taken for the future, and that side of it as well.
It was, Chair, I think it was 6 that were nominated at.
Well, I think, to be fair, we're probably talking two slightly separate things. That, I suppose, Julie was talking about the shared education programme.
Yeah.
Shared campus side of it, I think, was a call out, which is in terms of timescale.
Yes, I was talking about shared education DSC programme on the
I was wondering how you
revenue
got the
side.
300 and something anyway, but that's just by the way. I'm thinking in particular, not least, Moy. There was a scheme there that has been in the offing now for
Well, it is,
4 years.
From that point of view, it is progressing. I was down at Moy at both the schools that were involved. They have drawings, they have, on that side of things, and as far as where that is progressing, on that basis, I think the schools seem fairly happy with that. I think there's a good spirit there between them on that side of it.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Carla.
Thank you, and again, thank you, Minister, for coming on this, our final committee. Just 2 quick questions. If you could give us a wee update on the outdoor centres, just where we're at with that. I know, obviously, there's been quite a bit of unrest out there, and I think it'd be useful just to...
Well, look, from the point of view in terms of the outdoor centres, it's still a consultation stage with the EA. I can't directly jump in and consult. I would there's been a lot of concerns been raised. I think they're very genuine concerns. I have written to the EA and the Dáil members of the EA to effectively say you need to take a precautionary approach to this. You need to very heavily evaluate all the responses that are in. You need to see, and I think there are other models which can be provided, because there are things happening elsewhere in the world, across in England, for instance, where they think that there can be alternative plan Bs, and what I've also indicated to them is that they need not simply to evaluate those, but where people are coming forward with alternatives, to actually sit down and engage with them on that basis on it, because the key driver has got to be what is in the best interests of children. I think it's also got to be the case that those who are putting forward alternatives put forward relatively concrete alternatives. I think it's important that it's not just a question of saying this shouldn't happen, but I think there are models which can be put out there.
I appreciate that, because I do think the officials of the EA have went gung-ho with this and have actually caused a lot of ripples out on the ground. The other thing, very, very quickly, is just I want to just impress upon you, and I know you have been a real advocate of special needs. I just want to impress upon you the need for more joined-up government, and the fact that, you know, whilst we give, we have a working group that the Department of Health and Education work together. I would really appreciate, Minister.
No, I think it's important that we do all that's there. But I think the other thing which we really need to crack up is to try to ensure. I think there's very good work happens between the officials of that. I think in where maybe more patchy is what is absolutely delivered on the ground by individuals on that basis, and I think that's the bit I think that needs to do. And again, we're against a sort of a moving position a little bit in terms of special needs.
We just have a very frustrated group of mummies and daddies out there that just really feel that their children are missing out on therapies and missing out on early intervention. And I know you've been an advocate, and I just want you to assure us that you'll continue to be.
Absolutely.
Mr. Can I ask one final question? The status of the EA board, they're obviously political appointments to the EA board. Post-election.
Post-election, I think the procedure actually is that I think the quasi, if you like, the hunt is run. That will determine the number of posts that are there. I think there are then 8 working days for the nominating officers to nominate and take that position. That's something we've pressed, I think, the EA as well.
7 working days.
7 working days, sorry. 7 working days in that regard. And on that basis, on it, what I don't want to see a situation is the EA using, and to be fair, I don't think they've indicated any intention of doing this, using the cover of, well, actually, we'll try and long finger that. But I think it's important that those, whatever political representatives come forward, are there, that it's not a question of they are sidelined.
Does that happen whether there is an assembly in existence or not?
It should do. The nomination certainly will happen, because if you think of the time frame, basically, as I understand it, the election will take place. There is then, I think, a 7-day period to do the nomination of have an initial meeting, and then the 14-day period kicks in terms of that. Now, irrespective of whether there's any intervention in that 14-day period, the initial bit of nominations will take place before you've reached potentially crisis point in terms of the other bit. The issue, I suppose, in terms of appointments would be, particularly if there's new appointments, there would be, and I think those can be signed off ultimately by permanent secretaries in the department or whatever. The issue to some extent would be you might have to do checks on the individuals.
Yeah, I think the Dáil will get the numbers okay, but I think there may be a link to the Assembly meeting as well, and on some of those key dates through the process, so we just need to just look at that.
Maybe you could provide somebody with some clarification on that, the clerk or individual members. I say that, Minister, because there have been significant concerns around the openness and transparency and certain approaches taken by the Education Authority leadership, and it would be essential
we will send you, in terms of any information we have on the appointment process, we will send that to you today.
Okay. Well, you can see there's a wide range of issues there.
I understand that.
Any closing statement to people involved in education in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to have people that are as accountable as possible, and consequently, if a decision was taken by, which was a shell Education Authority, one that was denuded of any political representation on it, then I think people wouldn't think there was the same potential buy-in in terms of decisions. So yeah, but there's also a need to move on very quickly as well. So yeah, no, I think we will send you the we will email you the information ASAP.
And just picking up on that point, if I could, I know that last year when the election was run, the Education Authority Board had agreed not to make any significant decisions in that kind of interim period. So obviously, depending on how long things might go on, but that would be the same intention, without actually holding up sort of ongoing business as
There's
usual.
pros and cons, I suppose. So,
Yeah.
okay, hopefully we can work together to get back to business as soon as possible. Thanks very much,
thank you,
Minister. Thank you.
For the start. Academics
Dead on. Okay, members, thanks very much indeed for the participation in the wide range of issues there. I think, as we have endeavoured throughout our time as a committee, covered a number of issues of wider public concern there, and appreciate the contribution that everybody has made in that regard. Clerk, are there any particular actions, I suppose, given our final meeting? It's be unknown as to how they are followed up anyway, but there were obviously a few requests made that individual MLAs can take forward, or individual candidates potentially as of tomorrow can take forward, but we'll deal with that in due course then. Yeah.
And well, the department undertook, I think, to send some information, so I can circulate that today to members by email, but that will be to the end.
Okay. Any members want to make any comments before we move on from that session? Content?
Just disappointed we didn't have more time, Chair, because other questions there that we didn't get a chance to ask.
I think that demonstrates the commitment that was made by the committee over the short time that we were in place, and I think whilst there's a lot of hard questions being asked of the Minister, there was a lot of constructive engagement being made to try and make progress on the wide range of issues that we were raising. I genuinely, sincerely hope that it's possible to get back around these committee tables as soon as possible in the near future, because I do strongly believe that locally elected MLAs have that public concern at the forefront of their minds the majority of the time. So it's up to us after tomorrow to try and work towards that. Yeah, Carla.
I know the member across the way has said about the time, but I think we'll have to commend the Minister. I think in the short time that we've been here, the Minister's been before this committee, I think on one of the very first meetings and one of the very last. So I'm glad that we've actually had a Minister of Education that has been prepared to come and to address the issues and the difficult issues. So I think it would be very apt of this committee to actually convey that to the Minister.
I think it is constructive that the Minister has accepted invitations to come to attend the committee on a number of occasions. You see today that the Education Authority declined to do so, which is in stark contrast and is deeply disappointing. But I would agree as well, given the remit of issues that we have diligently sought to work on, that you're never going to have enough time to get through all of those, and we have to work with what we had, but the concerns are fairly made as well, I believe. Yeah, we could write to the Minister and express thanks for the attendance at the committee, even if we haven't agreed on all issues all of the time. It has given us that opportunity to engage on them. Content.
I think that's fair. He's definitely, above other ministers, from what I've heard of other committees, he's been very generous in his time to us, and I suppose we should give him that.
Okay. Content to move on, members? Yeah. Okay. Agenda item 2 then was chairperson's business. Remind members to contact IS office in order to arrange the return of their tablets and chargers before dissolution. Bit of
And Chair, if I could just, I care little if I never see mine again.
Yes.
yeah.
I don't even use mine.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it would be worth commenting that obviously we make use of the tablets to try and be cost efficient and environmentally responsible. The reams of paper that we would be going through, were it not for some sort of tablet provision would be quite extensive, but I take the point, Lord Morrow, that there may be work to do on a return in a assembly to make sure that they operate as efficiently as possible.
You have no idea the number of
Yeah.
times I was going to deposit that in the nearest bin.
But your higher level of patience got the better of you. Well done, well done. Okay. Draft minutes then, members. Agenda item 3 they're available on page 6. Are members content to agree that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings?
Content.
Agreed. Okay. Members content for me to sign off the minutes from today's meeting as well then, in lieu of the committee? Okay.
Yeah.
Agenda. Okay, I'll do that. Agenda item 4 then, members, matters arising. As there are no matters arising, we'll move to the next item of business unless anyone has anything to raise. No? Okay. Next item is agenda item number 6, which is correspondence. I would refer members to pages 55 to 108, where we have an index and 6 items provided under correspondence and 5 tabled items. Can I ask the clerk to speak to these items of correspondence, please?
So, Chair, I'll go through these quickly. The first item on page 57 is a response from the Department regarding the Pupils' Voice report. The predecessor committee had undertaken an inquiry into the promotion of school councils. The Department had issued a circular. This report was produced, I think, by Mickey and the Youth Forum, wanting them to really change that circular in order to encourage this further. I don't think the Department has not clarified whether it's going to take any action or not. And since we're sort of out of time, all that members can really do about these things is to note.
Okay.
And to note.
Noted.
Second one, page 92, getting ready to learn. This is following Mr McGrath's intervention last time. I think they've got their geography right now, and the preschool places are in the right place now. Cookstown, it's still in Cookstown. Page 103, just been made aware of a request for information under FY for information respecting the RHI scheme. I can tell members the committee has no such related information. You won't be surprised.
We don't have one of the boilers, we don't know.
And at page 104, just an invitation to the UTU annual conference, and again, members are content to note, as with the previous.
Noted.
Then we've got a copy of anonymous correspondence forwarded by the Public Accounts Committee just about student finance NI. This is administered and funded by the Education Authority, so although it deals with university and FE students, it's actually done by the Education Authority, and there was a suggestion about centralising the various sites. So again, it's suggested the committee notes.
Noted.
Yep. Then on education and health cooperation at page 108, the department has come back, and I've also included the previous response from the Education Authority on the issues that members just raised a few moments ago about cooperation. So again, that may be to look at it in the future in another committee, so otherwise note. And then tabled items, pupil attendance strategy. What the Education Authority has advised is that they are to undertake a review of the Education Welfare Service in 2017. They haven't given the terms of reference. This is one of the key recommendations from the PAC report, that there be this review of Education Welfare Service, because there were particular issues with the limited number of children that were referred to them. So no further details provided, suggested to be note. Then after that, in tabled items, we have computer-based assessment, just a response to the committee's query. DE indicates that it won't be issuing further guidance on CBA, on computer-based assessment, and that schools, it's up to them whether they use commercial CBA tools or not. These are the PI and PIMS that members were chatting about earlier. So again, it suggests the committee simply notes.
Okay, Rosemary, I know that was an issue that you wanted to raise. It was tough on the time available to us. I definitely think that the use of computer-based assessment is something that, if and when an education committee is restored, that should be on the agenda to examine. Okay, Clark, thank you. Noted.
Okay,
Members,
and then composite classes, page 20 of the tabled items. D appears to indicate that the evidence around the variation in attainment in composite classes is from ETI, entirely from ETI, and relates to composite classes with more than 2-year groups. And D appears to indicate that area planning will include actions to address small schools with more than 2-year groups in the one class. So again, suggested the committee notes.
And the only evidence is from ETI.
That seems to be what they say.
So
Page 24, this is Tim's and Pisa. We have a response to the committee regarding the key findings in the Tim's and Pisa study, so it's suggested the committee notes that. Okay. Nearly there. Over the page at 612, sorry, page 28, public appointments. So, response to committee queries regarding public appointments, so appointments to boards, etc., by the departments. DE indicates that it has achieved or nearly achieved the appointment targets for the male-female balance. So, again, it suggests that the committee notes. And finally, Youth Assembly. This is from the Speaker. Just the committee had written off asking what the plans were there, and the Speaker has come back with some commentary in respect of the other youth engagement work which the Youth Assembly is engaged with. So, to note.
Okay. I think there should be work done towards a youth assembly, but I know at this moment in time it's not a proposal.
Next 5 hours.
Okay. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, Clerk, thank you very much indeed. Any other business members?
Chair,
Yes.
just to thank you for chairing things over the last number of weeks when Sinn Féin haven't turned up for the last number of weeks and are paid to be here. I appreciate the way you've chaired this and been very fair in doing that. And I also want to say as well, I think this committee have been doing some good work over the last number of months, and for someone who didn't come from an education background, I was really starting to get a grasp of the issues, and both with meeting local principals and what was being raised in the committee, I felt that we were starting to make real progress. So I'm certainly disappointed as to where we are, but I think the committee have done a good job in general.
Thanks for that. I do think we had just started to work our way into a wide range of extremely important issues across education, way beyond what I had foreseen in advance that education would allow us to try and make a contribution towards. So I certainly echo those comments. Might be an opportunity for me as chair and us as members to record our thanks to the committee staff as well for the thorough and diligent contribution that they make to the work of this committee, and for that organisational memory and ability, hope that the committee is restored as soon as possible as well to ensure that that continues to make a contribution. And can I add my thanks to all members, past and present, for the contribution to the work of the committee as well. This is the last meeting of the committee. Thank everyone who in the public from our schools, and delighted to welcome a school group here for our last session of our committee as well. Thank them for the contribution that they have made to the committee. We need the public to engage with us on these issues to ensure that we ask the right questions and make the contribution that we're able to make. So hopefully in the near future there will be an opportunity for the Education Committee to be restored and to continue with the important work that's on our agenda. No further comments. I can't take comments from the gallery, unfortunately, but we can speak to members who have kindly attended today afterwards. So ask the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Adjourned.
The Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.